Before this video begins, there will be spoilers for Deltarune Chapter 3 and 4. Proceed with caution. You have been warned. Hello everyone, my name is Ninja Noodle Nick, and with the long-awaited release of the next installment in the Undertale series finally upon us, after a grueling 4-year wait, we've got a ton of new content to dive into. With new characters to analyze and new mysteries to untangle, today's video takes us deeper than ever before. This video is a sort of follow-up to the one I made like a few months ago. You absolutely do not need to watch that one to understand this. However, to give you the brief rundown of things I theorized to get you up to speed, it was an attempt to argue that Kris was in fact not the Roaring Knight, something I was proven right about in the most recent chapters. As the Knight finally reveals themselves, after 2 chapters of lurking in the shadows as this mysterious, almost mythic presence, slicing through Tenna like they were nothing in the aftermath of his fight, and nearly killing him before kicking off the true final boss of that chapter, and just throwing you into a fight that's impossible to win. Not really. The outcome is the same, as they obliterate the fun game, having the ability to one-shot them. Now that video was about 40 minutes long, and while a good chunk of it was focused on proving that Kris wasn't the Knight, I didn't want to stop there. Just to argue my points against a specific candidate felt incomplete. I needed a counter-argument to sort of oppose this narrative of Kris being the Knight, and using that to strengthen the points I made against Kris Knight. So the entire second half of that video was dedicated to trying to decipher who the Knight could actually be, if it wasn't our main protagonist. I wasn't just pushing back on a popular theory, I wanted to shine a spotlight on the character I genuinely believed had the strongest chance of being the Knight. And so in that video, I made a pretty bold prediction, one that may have actually come to pass, that Des, Noelle's missing sister, was in fact the true Roaring Knight, and it's possible she's in a state far removed from anything we'd call living, which is something that I also predicted. The identity of the Knight isn't 100% confirmed in the narrative, however there's enough evidence that I feel only points towards one conclusion, which is what I will be theorizing and discussing today. Right now the community is pretty split on who the Roaring Knight actually is. Some people made a case for it being Noelle's mom, Carol, who we're also finally introduced to in the new batch of content, but I believe that that's nothing more than a red herring. I was right about Kris being one. I feel there's a good chance I'm correct about this as well. In today's video, I will be breaking down everything we've learned about the Knight, as well as Des, across both chapters 3 and 4, to make the case that she's undoubtedly the Knight, and that it makes no sense for it to be anyone else. I've been on the train for a while, and I have no intent on stopping off anytime soon. And now, not now, especially not now. There was evidence before, but now with all the new content, there's an overwhelmingly obvious amount to the point I really don't understand how you can make a case for anyone else. Along the way of exploring this idea, we'll also be exploring the connections Kris has to the Roaring Knight, now that we know for sure they aren't them, examining how they got pulled into the story even though they clearly don't want to be a part of it. Something else I'm going to prove in today's video, because I will not stand for this continuous Kris slander. But with all that out of the way, if you enjoyed this video or agree with any of the points that I raised, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump right into this video, beginning with why people believe that Carol is the Knight. At the end of chapter 3, after the fun gang is completely destroyed by the Knight attempts to kidnap Toriel, who ended up in the Dark Road as a result of Kris's actions. Before they can get away, however, Undyne shows up at the last possible moment. The Knight escapes with Undyne into the light world, and Kris and Susie chase them down, only to be locked out when the Knight enters the shelter, an isolated building on the edge of hometown. When Susie bangs on the door hard enough, a hidden panel is revealed, requiring codes to enter. This mystery plays heavily into chapter 4. Fast forward to the day of the church, before Susie can go home following her sleepover with Kris. Tori invites Susie to come along. The church happens to be near the shelter, so Susie takes this up as an opportunity to investigate. During these scenes, we get a key bit of information from Alphys. Since she moved to hometown, the only 2 people she's ever seen near the shelter are the mayor, Carol, Noelle's mother, and Undyne. Considering the fact that Undyne was taken by the night while Carol stands tall, it immediately flags her as a potential suspect, especially since the building has supposedly been sealed off all this time. Later on, Napster adds to the mystery. During the free roam sections of Hometown, you can find them outside that police station where they say Undyne had been in charge of something about that place, an important code or something. It was the only thing that ever made her nervous. I never saw it though. I don't think it's even in the station. So now that we know Undyne had serious knowledge about the shelter and a fear of it, and if Carol, the mayor, shares the same knowledge, and the only other person that's been seen over there, on top of her still standing, on top of the knights seemingly being able to enter the shelter at will, implying they know the codes, well, that does start to seem a bit suspicious. Then there's the katanas. Carol owns multiple swords for some fucking reason. Rudy, who somehow manages to make it to church in spite of his illness, mentions that Carol insists on keeping anything important at home. This gives Susie the idea to stage a study session with Noelle, which is really just a chance to snoop around. Sure enough, they find a katana in the kitchen, and in the vent sequence where Kris temporarily removes the player from their body, you can peek into Carol's bedroom and spot another katana. I don't think it's visible in the actual game, but in the files you can actually see a katana. Considering the knight uses a sword, it's easy to assume these weapons are meant to invoke a connection between Carol and the knight. Later, Kris finds Des's guitar, hidden with a code inside it. Kris doesn't let us see the code, and during a phone call in the kitchen, we hear Kris being told that Susie shouldn't have the guitar, and Carol, she doesn't appear to want Susie to have it either. There is evidence to suggest that the call Kris makes in the kitchen and the one in Des's bedroom actually are the same person. They have a similar typing quirk, and when Kris makes the call in Des's bedroom about Susie having the guitar, the person on the other line says they will be there right away. And lo and behold, who shows up? Carol, who wasn't even meant to be home until later that night, according to Noelle. Not to mention that when Kris makes that call in Des's room, it's the other line that asks about the guitar. Why would Carol ask something about that if they weren't the same person? That would just be really weird. I'm not trying to make the argument that Kris is working for Carol instead of the knight. I'm making the argument that Kris, Carol, and the knight are all connected in some way. Especially since we haven't actually seen the knight talk on top of their name. With roaring in the title and their animalistic behavior suggests that it's unlikely that they talk at all, which I want to get more in depth to a little bit later on. Add in Carol's consistently cold, commanding presence, and you can start to understand why people think she's behind everything, which, to be fair, she might be, but I don't think she's the knight. She even seems to be aware of the existence of the player, because at the end of the sections in Noelle's house, as you go to leave, she turns to Kris and says, "You are always welcome here," with the "you" being highlighted red, implying she wasn't talking to Kris there, she was talking to us. She also collects things that resemble red human souls within this universe, so it's obvious that she might have more information about the state of her world than she probably should. And despite all of this, I still truly believe that Carol, actually being the knight, despite all of this seemingly evidence, in quotation marks, is still a red herring. But that doesn't mean she's not involved. This is where any evidence I could find for why people believe Carol being the knight comes to an end though, even though some of it is debatable. Like, just because she has this knowledge doesn't mean she's a knight. It just means she's relevant to the story. I just wanted to present some points that I've seen for Carol Knight, to present one side of the debate, before I present a counter argument that's much more convincing and plausible, as I will be using my evidence from the last time I did this, on top of the new stuff we've learned. With the Carol theory on the table, let's move on to what this video is really about. Let's start with something simple but revealing, the antlers that rest upon the knight. The Roaring Knight's antlers look a lot more like Noelle's and Rudy's compared to Carol's. Carol's antlers are sharp and jagged, while the knight's are more rounder and smoother and more natural and curved, almost identical to Noelle's, just longer and slightly bent. This might seem like a small detail, but it's actually important, because in Deltarune we've seen that these characters' physical features stay consistent between the light world and dark world. Their colors might shift, but their physicalities of their bodies don't actually change. For example, Noelle's antlers remain the exact same, and Susie's tail is present in both realms. There's no current precedent for a character's body radically changing just by crossing over. So when we look at Carol, it's hard to believe her antlers suddenly contort to be more in line with the knight's appearance. And considering the fact that Carol's entire body would have to change for her to even be a contender for the knight, it makes it very unlikely since we have seen nothing like that before. It's possible, but since we have currently no evidence of anything like this, despite all the people we've seen enter the Dark Worlds, it feels unlikely. I don't think there's a reason for her physicality to warp like that, especially when the other characters stay visually consistent. But yeah, I feel like the antlers is a solid piece of visual evidence that argues against Carol being the knight. Now, the knight's antlers do closely resemble one of the characters we've met already, and that is the GOAT, Rudy. You heard it here, folks, right? You thought we were talking about Death Theory? No. This is Rudy Theory. Rudy is the Roaring Knight. Back on track, Rudy, Noelle's father. It's clear that Noelle inherited her round, smooth antlers from him. And if we assume Rudy's traits are genetically dominant, like in the real world, as that's usually the case with fathers, it would make sense for both of his daughters to share similar features. Now you may be questioning, we do see deaths for the first time in-game so far through Tenna's explanation of the past, and they do seem normal, but they also seem more in line with what I described. They are small, but you can make out the fact they are similar to Noelle's. As for how Dessa's antlers got so warped, I imagine it has something to do with why she went missing. It could also be related to something we haven't seen yet. That's also possible. The visual connection strengthens the idea that Noelle and the Knights are related, which points directly to Des being the Knight. Unless Deltarune suddenly introduces a completely new deer-like character out of nowhere, which seems unlikely. This clue adds even more weight to Death's Knight theory. Now let's talk about the Knight's body design, because it tells us a lot, especially when comparing it to Carol's. At first glance, the Knight mates appear to have a somewhat feminine silhouette, but on closer inspection, their figure is far more skeletal than anything distinctly feminine. The Knight's torso seems to mimic the structure of a ribcage, and during the intro animation, we literally see them open their chests, exposing a hollow cavity with a faint white core at the center. The animation even shows the Knight unhinging their jaw, invoking the imagery of something undead or reanimated. A corpse, not a person in armor. Something I actually crazily predicted. Fucking insane. Anyways, this ties into a common zombie/skeleton visual trope. Prominent rib cages, sunken abdomen, and exaggerated joints. The body is shaped less like a soft human form and more like a walking skeleton. Oh, here we go. Here it comes, baby. Papyrus theory. Let's go. Let's fucking go. It's the last time I do that joke. I swear. The hips and spine are also visible, with no flesh surrounding it, reinforcing the skeleton interpretation. No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. Something Carol's living, healthy body absolutely doesn't match. Which brings us to Des. If Carol is alive, active, and fully functioning, and if the Knight's body looks like a broken, hollow, and corpse-like, then it makes more sense for the Knight to be Des, someone who's been missing and most likely met a violent end. If Des was killed or experimented on, it would explain the Knight's skeletal, unnatural appearance. And if I don't want to get into Gaster territory, but if Gaster is the scientist and behind this whole thing, he could have experimented on Des. I'm not throwing that out there as a serious thing, but like, it's possible. I think I've spent enough time focusing on the Knight's look. Let's focus on more direct connections to Des. Before the fight even begins, the thing that the Knight is holding begins as a bat before it's transformed into a sword. Now Des has multiple connections to bats. If you speak to Noelle in chapter 1 at the gate that leads to her house and tell her that Susie is eating the chalk, Noelle will state that, "So Des smacked you with the wiffle ball bat until you stopped lying?" The wiffle ball bats looked eerily similar to what the Knight is holding. In addition to this, you can interact with Noelle's computer and learn that one of her wallpapers is Des holding a cracked baseball bat. And if you peek into the room of Des, you can actually find one of her old wiffle ball bats in a pile. The baseball/wiffle ball connections Don't stop here though. The little ball form the knight can transform into resembles a baseball. Baseballs actually happen to appear in the Chapter 1 and 2 Dark Worlds. In Chapter 1, you can find baseballs in Card Castle, in the room with the party. And in Chapter 2, the moon itself is that of a baseball. Speaking of the moon baseball, Noelle says this during that sequence. I wish Des could see this. Early in the chapter, she also mentioned Des during that walk with Kris while they pressed the buttons that spell out December. And Des, she'd always told me she'd take me somewhere like this, somewhere with shiny lights, which screams like very obvious foreshadowing when you take into account where each Dark World the knight made was. In Chapter 1, it was the school. In Chapter 2, it was the library. In Chapter 4, it was the church. All places Noelle realistically would be. And if we take a look at the lyrics to Raise Your Bat, there's even more evidence. Before the song starts, Tenna mentions Des. Oh, Kris, remember December? Oh, that little musical prodigy? Remember when she grabbed the remote and swapped it from cartoons to that wild music video channel Torio forbid you to see? Des rocking her guitar and singing along with those nasty, nasty songs. Didn't you all think she was just so cool? Heck, maybe you could get her to come back and watch again sometime. It is not a coincidence. Tenna mentions Des before the song because the lyrics seem very connected to Des in some way. When the demon heart is crying and the blood is gushing bright. Raise up your bat for a burning fight. The line, and the blood is gushing bright, relates to Des because we know she was into violent comic books and was a fan of knives. Des did seem to be a violent individual. Based on her interactions we know that she had with Kris. And of course, Raise Up Your Bat for a burning fight feels like just foreshadowing for what happens at the end of Chapter 3, considering that's exactly what happens. The Lost Girl motif plays during this section, and the violent lyrics that are in this song just feels like it screams the death that we've heard about. But I also feel like the lyrics are interesting because under the context of Death Knight, that's exactly what we are doing. We are following her into the dark to try and prevent her from causing the ruin, with our soul literally shining the way towards the end of Chapter 4, breaking through the darkness as we are destroyed by the swords of the night. Where there's a secret room that you can access in Chapter 3 by inputting 1,225 points into the prize machine. In this room, that plays Find Her, by the way, you can eventually come across this blue version and interact with it. And you will get the text. Inside was something hard, like lacquer. It was a small, dark triangle. Ignoring the dark part for a moment, a small triangle describes a guitar pick perfectly. Lacquer is actually what's used to make guitar picks. Moreover, when you beat the secret boss encounter, which is just the knight if you somehow don't know, a fragment of the sword is broken off, leaving a small black triangle-shaped crack in its blade. Kris can pick it up, which becomes the black shard in your inventory, which is depicted as a small black triangle, just like when you get from the blue prize machine. I really don't think this is a coincidence. It's possible they are born from the same material because lacquer can be used on weapons as a protective coating and used to make guitar picks. Interestingly enough, the black shard doesn't actually change when you are in the light world. It's the first instance we've seen outside of the egg that doesn't change. So this seems to suggest that the knight transcends the bounds of both realities and is just the knight in both realms. Which is not as crazy as it sounds. It's actually supported by pretty good evidence. When Susie says the knight couldn't beat them in the light world, it laughs right in her face. In addition to that, the knight's light world form is able to restrain and carry Undyne, the strongest person in Hometown who bench pressed cars for fun, against her will and took her all the way to the bunker, while also being as fast or just faster than Susie. This implies that the knight is extremely powerful in the light world as well as the dark world. As I mentioned before, all other Lightners retain their physical bodies for the most part when they enter a dark world, with changes only really made to outfit and color. The knight, meanwhile, has skeletal proportions, strange shape-shifting powers, and when it roars, it bears external ribs, which suggests they work differently than every other Lightner, meaning their sword that they wield is no different either. If the knight did change, the weapon would too. For instance, if Carol was the knight and her sword was a katana in the light world, it'd become a chip of katana, or if Death's chip of bat. But it doesn't. It's still a black shard. The fact it doesn't change implies that its wielder doesn't either. And from going there under the concept of Death, she must have been transformed into the Knight in such a way to use both the Knight in the light world and the dark world. And as to how the Knight hasn't been spotted in the light world, well, this question has a two-part answer in my opinion. We know that the Knight was the one that created the Chapter 2 Dark World, and the only way they could have done that is if Burley and Noelle were actually in the room because their books were already set up and everything. The closet in my room says a large person could easily fit inside. Given the same text appears in Chapter 4 when interacting with the church's closet, it's safe to assume that the Knight hid inside the closet in both instances. I imagine the closets are either just an underground system that links to the bunker, or they are teleporting doors that allow them to traverse hometown. Moving on though, I mentioned the segments of Noelle's house where you detach from Kris. During them, you could actually find Asgore cleaning the bathroom before he leaves to check Carol's room. During that cutscene he says, "I just wanted to protect everyone, and this time she'll have to believe me. They all will. Then we'll all be a happy family again, won't we?" It sure is beautiful, isn't it? This black shard. Asgore has a piece of the Knight's weapon that he wants to show to people to prove he was protecting everyone. Which, by the way, means that Asgore not only fought the Knight, but actually lived to tell the tale. The goat's so got it, even though there's kind of evidence to suggest the Knight doesn't actually want to kill the Fun Gang or anyone really. Because if the Knight was interested in that, they could have easily done so at the end of Chapter 3. Susie and Rousey could not stand a chance against the Knight. Absolutely no way. And in the Chapter 4 Power of Friendship scene towards the end, with Kris shining, with Arso shining in the dark, while the Knight pelts us with swords, the Knight just randomly stops once we get to the top. When Kris, Susie, and Rousey were all at 1 HP. If the Knight wanted to kill them, they would have done that easily. So it seems like they're only interested in actually just slowing the Fun Gang down. But it's still cool to know that Asgore is one of the first people that we actually know of to fight the Knight and live to tell the tale. That's awesome. I cannot wait to see Asgore's role in the future, since it's definitely going to be much bigger than it is now, knowing that he fought the Knight. We know he was fired from the police station, and it most likely has something to do with Des and this black shard. Sticking with the holiday house though, if we go back to Des's room, it's notably darker themed. Her door is black, her room glows in the dark, and she owns a lot of emo/goth horror items. Back to the actual Knight fight for a moment. The Knight swoons Susie and Rousey, putting them down to 999 HP, or negative 999 HP, but only downs Kris to negative 80 HP. For now, I believe that Des, regardless of if she's all there, at the very least, recognizes Kris, hence why she goes easy on them compared to Susie and Rousey, who she obliterates. Additionally, Susie has a comment about when your sister gets cursed in Dragon Blazers 2. The Knight's design has many parallels to Wendigo, associated with curses and trances. Remember trances. This will be very important in a second, actually. Like literally a second. If Des aids the Knight, there's a likelihood she's in a trance or under a curse of some form. This is supported by an unused check description for Chapter 3's Shadow Crystal. It reads, "You held the crystal up to your eye. For some strange reason, for just a brief moment, you thought you saw Undyne frozen in ice," which implies that this is an ability the Knight has, being able to snowgrave people. Noelle is put into a trance herself when she is forced to equip the Thorn Ring. The Knight having that same ability that Noelle has seems to be another thing that points towards Des being the Knight. Not only that, but the Knight's final attack resembles snowflakes, but moreover, it's also a homage to PK Starstorm from Earthbound, which is more important than you might think. The main protagonist of Earthbound Beginnings, or Mother 1, whichever one you want to call it, is named Ninten. Ninten's mother is named Carol Holloway. Noelle's mother is also named Carol, and their last names are very similar. Des has a connection to baseball, like I mentioned earlier. Ness, the main protagonist of Earthbound, or Mother 2, whatever we want to call it, primarily uses the baseball bat as her weapon. Not to mention Des is also one letter off from Ness, It's time for Death is Necessary. Let's go, everybody. Okay, I swear that's the last time I did that joke. It's not the first two games either that Death seems to pull inspiration from. I think Death being the Knight is where Toby's inspiration from the three shines the brightest. Spoilers in case you haven't played a game that's nearly 20 years old now. I think if you look at Toby's inspirations, I think it's kind of clear. Especially since Mother 3 is one of Toby's biggest inspirations. Similarities are astounding, honestly. The story puts a huge emphasis on two sibling characters. One of those sibling characters has mysteriously vanished without a trace, and nobody knows what happened to them, but they moved on after a while. If you take that out of context, you've had no clue which game I'm referring to. The setups are quite identical. There's no reason to suspect that the payoff will be any different. The context will be different though. In Mother 3 it was very much nature versus technology. I mean, the final battle literally has Lucas using a baseball bat against a dude with a fucking lightning sword. In Deltarune, Kris and Des will just be parallels of one another. As to what actually happened to Des that led her to the state, I'm not sure. Remember, Mother 3 is a huge inspiration for Toby, and Claus also dies in the game before being turned into a robotic puppet by Porky, so I do think it's something similar like that. But here, Des would just be a parallel to Kris, both being controlled by some higher being to do their bidding, essentially. Claus was the masked man that was controlled and puppeteered by the main antagonist, Porky, to pull the 7 needles and end the world. Huh, cool. 7 needles, 7 chapters. Interesting. Deltarune is similarly set up. It takes place in a small town we see evolve over time, with a big plot point revolving around the sibling of a character having gone missing, who is later revealed to be an antagonist the characters are chasing this whole time. In this case, it's Death and the Knight. I don't know how far these similarities will continue, but it's interesting to take note of. It's part of how I was able to predict the story the first time, on top of the other evidence that seemed to point towards that conclusion. I feel like Toby even references this through Gerson, who literally says stories can be retold and changed. That's what he believes. I feel like that was literally just Toby talking to us at this point, with how similar Mother 3 and Deltarune are. It's nice seeing how much these games influence his work, and I can see why. I played them for the first time a few months ago, and they were absolute peak. I highly recommend if you haven't played them already. If you love Deltarune and if you love these games, you'll love those as well. Anyways, another piece of evidence for Death Knight is the fact that if you check them in battle, it reads Kris analyzed the enemy, but Kris couldn't learn anything, which could imply that Kris already knows who the Knight is. And during the fight, there will be text that says, "You saw golden stars," something you can find in Death's room. This can be supported by the fact that in Chapter 4, if you choose not to close your eyes and see what Susie is doing, you can actually think of what the Knight is doing instead. And in that cutscene, Kris imagines the Knight taking off their helmet and tries really hard to imagine Drakington as the Knight, which to me, it feels like Kris was stopping us from seeing who they are. On top of Kris not allowing us to open the closet door at the end of Chapter 4. And of course, if you manage to last long enough in the Knight's battle, it will end with the Knight knocking Susie and Rossi down, like normal, but seemingly knights Kris. Now, while I do believe that Kris is working for the Knight, I don't think that's all there is to it. I believe Carol is just as much as involved. In all our encounters with the Knight, we've never seen them talk. I think this is important to note. The only time the Knight seems to show any emotion at all is right before they create the Titan at the end of Chapter 4. That's all we really get. It's just roaring, fleeing, and fighting. The name is the Roaring Knight, but I don't think that's just because they intend on causing the roaring, like the name implies. I think that name has a double meaning. The Knight may very well be a force or a constant personified. If it is a person with an identity, I think it's very likely the person is being controlled or behaving subconsciously. With this in mind, relating back to Des, it seems my original prediction of Des being dead, then being reanimated, only to be possessed and controlled by some entity, was somehow fucking correct. Honestly insane. Call me the Oracle at this point. She's seemingly possessed by something far darker than us. who's controlling Kris, transforming her body into nothing more than a simple puppet. But I do think there's a small part of her in there, which is why the Knight doesn't brutalize Kris like she does Susie and Rousey, in addition to them working together, of course. On top of all the things that I mentioned, I want to include a lot of the stuff that I said about Des being the Knight in my original video. So I'm going to include that right here. Go.
It pulls the strings and makes them ring. Now this is a hidden line, a hidden lyric in Big Shot. It pulls the strings and make them ring. And now you can make a guitar string ring, and when you place the puppet scarf on Noelle, which you can't see in normal gameplay, that you get from defeating Spamton, Noelle will say it feels like guitar strings. So Spamton has this weird tie to guitar strings because you can make a guitar string ring. And Des herself is tied to guitars because when we first encounter the Find Her theme, it's accompanied with a picture, with an image of a guitar and an acoustic version of the Lost Girl theme, which is why I don't think the Lost Girl theme is referring to Noelle. It's obviously referring to that. So Spamton himself, for some reason, has a tie to guitars, which is weird because nothing else to Spamton is tied to guitars outside of this specific instance of him having a line in his song that references guitar strings being rung. So I think this could hint at the fact that Des herself is being pulled around on strings by some higher force.
With that in mind, though, I think someone else is giving Kris orders, and that person is Carol. I explained my reasoning before, but the last piece of evidence I want to bring up before I move on is the noise that plays around the bunker also plays in the basement of the Holiday Manor. Now this brings us to the character of the code, who I first believed to be the Death Soul, as that seemed to make sense to me, because I thought, like, if Des was the Knight, that would contradict or conflict with the idea of the person in the code being Des, but I don't believe that anymore, and here's why. Here's the unused text from chapter 3. What is this place anyway? How did I get here? As if I haven't asked that question a billion times already. I always did have that nightmare, walking into the darkness, with a light shining from the doorway. Then the door slams behind me, and everything goes black. Is this that nightmare? Or was everything else a dream? I would just like to point out that Des mentions dreams here, and dark horrors are heavily connected to them, as they are the result of bringing one's dreams into reality. And the end there sounds eerily similar to the way chapter 1 began, with Kris and Susie making their way into the dark closet before the doors shut behind them. Now here's the chapter 4 unused text. I'm starting to lose track of the time. Has it been days? Hours? If someone told me it's been years, I might believe them. Before the sun came up, and so many wonderful things happened that made time meaningful. Things like breakfast or late night TV. In this place, I don't eat or drink anymore. I can't tell if I'm awake or dreaming. I can't tell if I'm dead or alive. It's just nothing but pitch black and silence. Except for that noise. That scratching noise I sometimes hear. It sounds crazy, but even though no one can hear me, when I hear that noise, I feel like someone's listening. Anyway, if you're there, thank you. The person trapped within appears to have life experience, which of course contradicts with my original theory of this being the vessel. I originally believed the vessel because, like, the vessel had to be stored somewhere, and I thought that meant, like, literally stored in the code. It was a bad theory. Okay, but yeah, they all can be winners. But I believe this is Des. Now I have two possible theories for what the text is. It's either text from when she first entered and before she got swallowed up by the dark, or this is where the rest of her consciousness remains, stored deep within. And maybe the Find Her song title is about finding the rest of her mind to bring Des home, while her body, decayed and withered, is being controlled by some otherworldly being we most likely haven't been introduced yet. As for Kris's involvement with the Knight, my original theory for the end of chapter 2 was that Kris set up a situation for Undyne to be called out to the dream residence so that they could prove to Undyne dark worlds exist and that they were a real, ever-present danger. I don't believe this anymore. It's much more likely that the whole situation was a scheme to lure Undyne into a trap to be captured by the Knight and taken. Slashing the tires, leaving the door open, it's very obvious that was the plan. The Roaring Knight's presence in this particular dark world is also extremely sus, by the way. Why would they even be here? This wasn't a dark world they created. So what reason would they have to just happen to be lurking near Torio's house at the top of town at exactly the right time? Is too deliberate. And Kris, they almost certainly have some kind of connection to the Knight. That doesn't mean they're cooperating willingly or directly, but there's clearly some shared influence at play, some larger force pulling the strings. Most likely the person on the other end of Kris's phone call, the one giving the orders, the one's calling the shots, the one who doesn't want Susie to have the guitar. And for right now, the best candidate for that role is Carol. Or Gaster, pick your poison, right? I'm not turning this into a goddamn Gaster theory video. we don't need to go there. We don't need to go there yet. Gaster doesn't even feel like an antagonist at this point because he cheers you on during the night fight. So I don't even understand what his role in the story is anymore. But considering the fact that Des is almost certainly the Knight, I don't know. It just makes a weird amount of sense for Carol to be the one controlling her. It could be that Des recognizes her in the same way she does Kris. I think the way I'm going about this theory and thinking is that Carol is kind of the head, and then like sort of having Kris and the Knight / Des on a leash, while Des herself and Kris are both controlled by other entities, essentially. That's kind of the way I'm thinking about it. It might be too complicated. Like something's got to be controlling Des to make her like this evil being of destruction. So that's my theory on that. Kris also completely sabotages our attempts to learn the code necessary to save Undyne, ripping us out of their chests before we can read the whole code. By the way, it's most likely 1225. We see most of it. We see 122 before it cuts off. But I mean this as December 25th, given that seems to be a very important number and is used twice throughout Chapter 3. Once for one of the parental lock systems, and once for the Gacha machine for the secret room they could find, that police find her. There's a strong possibility that Des was also taken for the same reason Undyne was. These two disappearances are too similar to be coincidental. In Chapter 4, Undyne is referred to directly as a sacrifice, and we know she was targeted by the Knight. Given that Des is also missing, it seems reasonable to group them in under the same narrative function, individuals being taken for some greater purpose. This ties directly into the mysterious bunker and the recurring symbols, the badge, the tree, and the Deltarune symbol. Based on the current context, it's fair to speculate that the badge represents Undyne, while the tree could symbolize Des, and if we fall or Noel. And if we follow that logic, the Deltarune might represent Torio, with her suddenly wearing it, plus it happening on the heels of Undyne's badge symbol related kidnapping. As for the Knight, their actions also seem to support this pattern actually. After trying to abduct Torio at the end of Chapter 3, the very next thing they do is attack the church during choir practice, where Torio should have been had it not been raining. So Kris has some sort of mission, creating a fountain to lure Undyne, stopping our attempts to help her, and obeys the person on the phone. Understanding their motivations is hard. Kris isn't even the only member of the Dreamer residence that appears to be a part of this. Asgore seems to be just as big a player in this whole thing. Obviously, we know that Asgore has some sort of run-in with the Knight in the past. Him and Carol also seem to be working together for some reason. Like there's a corkboard in both Carol's room, and we can read that there's one in Asgore's flower shop as well. So what does this all mean? Well, I think Asgore's original firing was mostly because he knows too much. Originally, I thought he messed up the Des case so badly, he had to step down and be let go. And maybe even Carol got so mad she fired him for being so bad at his job. But here they are, Asgore working with Carol, despite everything that happened. Asgore is a desperate man. All his attempts to win back Torio is to try and repair his family before Asriel returns home from college. He's very persistent in wanting to prove himself. apparently. And that's why I believe Carol fired him. She fired him because he knows too much, and the only reason she is helping Asgore out is to keep an eye on him to make sure he doesn't get close to the truth. Given how desperate Asgore is, I don't think that's out of the question. I really do think Asgore is being manipulated here. So it would appear we have Kris and the Knight working for Carol, ready to sacrifice Undyne to what end? Well, we don't have enough information really, since the sacrifice thing is mentioned only once and it's the first time something like that has ever entered the story. But I really feel like I know what Kris's end goal in this whole thing is at least. While Kris may seem distant or passive at times, especially with how often we the player take control of their actions, there's a quiet and persistent pattern that proves one thing. Kris clearly cares deeply about their friends, even if they're trapped in a larger plan they don't agree with. Their affection still finds a way to shine through. Let's walk through the moments that make this clear. One of the most obvious examples comes during the final battle of King, during a moment when the player has no control. Kris throws themselves in front of Susie to protect her from a deadly attack. This isn't something we tell them to do. It's a reflex, a gut reaction, one that proves, especially early on, how much Susie already means to Kris in Chapter 1. They also do this during the fight with the statue from the old man's study in Chapter 4. After the intense spamton fight, Kris wanted a hug from Susie, which is huge. It's not dramatic or flashy, just human vulnerability. It shows Kris wants closeness. When Susie asks Kris who they want to take to the festival, Kris sounds confused if you choose Noelle or Rouse, something Susie even comments on. But if you choose Susie, there's no confusion. No awkward tone, there's just honesty. And if you choose to say nothing, Susie picks up on this again, saying Kris doesn't need to keep staring at her. Both of these paths suggest Kris wanted to say Susie all along. During the diner scene, we can tell them to draw something. We don't pick what it is, but Kris decides to draw Susie. In the quest line for the Shadow Mantle, during the third secret minigame, you have to kill both Susie and Rouse in order to progress. If that happens, Kris does something telling. They look away. A quiet, wordless moment of guilt and sorrow. If Kris didn't care about them, it would have focused on the screen, which is evident when we are forced to kill Tenna in order to progress as well, and they don't look away. At the end of Chapter 4, if you choose to stay and wait at the lake, Kris turns to Susie. If you choose to say what's on your mind, Kris will do so with their mouth closed, like they really want to say something, but can't bring themselves to do it. There's also a brief but powerful interaction where we, the player, can choose to say to Rouse that he shouldn't have feelings. But Kris muffles this with a yawn, which I think shows just how much they care for Rouse's well-being. They're not okay with that level of cruelty to him. We have seen evidence of Kris being able to disobey us before, but we're completely fine searching for answers to the bunker for Susie and gave her information when they could have easily stopped us from doing so. Something seems to lead to a change of heart by the time they get to the holiday house. There's also this moment in Kris's house when you interact with the mirror, this text appears. It's hard to put into words, but for some reason, seeing Susie next to you, you felt like whatever you were, just for right now, it might be okay. One of my favorite lines in the game. Why bring any of this up though? My point is that Kris cares a lot for their friends. They love them. They love their mom, in spite of her quirks. I wanted to point all this out to kind of highlight that Kris is not some evil person who wants to destroy the world. I'm sick of this narrative being spun when they very clearly don't want any part of this, yet here they are. The funny detail I love is in Chapter 4, they have the phone on speaker when they are presumably talking to Carol while making chocolate milk. Like you'd think they would be more discreet. Like they don't give a fuck, bro. But I think it's telling that Find Her, a theme heavily associated with deaths, as shown in the Spamton sweepstakes, when it showed her guitar and played this theme, and you need to input the code 1225 to even access the area that plays this theme, plays for the first time in the Chapter 3 Dark World, the same Dark World created by Kris. I think that is their end goal. I think that is the end goal here for Kris. I think Kris is only helping in the hopes that they could find a way to bring back Des. It's why they were doing these shady actions to begin with. And in a way, maybe that's even what Carol's game plan is too. We learn at the end of chapter 4 that Kris made some sort of promise, which they appear to be honoring, given their shady actions so far. Kris made a promise to Carol. Des is Carol's mother. It makes sense to me that whatever their plan is, it involves finding Des. And I mean, like, pushing past all the corruption and finding the true Des that's been locked away by this warped character. I think Kris is well aware of what happened to Des, as when they first encountered the door that eventually leads to Castletown. They do a dramatic step back and freeze, like they are scared, like they are remembering something. I just think that Carol's ultimate plan, and if I'm thinking about the way Toby writes his characters, and how he loves to sprinkle in a little bit of gray, I think Carol doing whatever it takes to save her daughter and bring her home makes a lot of sense to me and is great character motivation. I don't really like using outside sources to make my argument, but I think this will be a good way to highlight the way Toby thinks about his characters, especially Carol. There's a blog post that Noelle made that we see first in the Spamton Sweepstakes 2, in which we learned that the school was shut down for a day by the mayor because it was raining, so that Noelle wouldn't have to walk in the rain. The mayor, of course, being Noelle's mom. I know it's very small, it's not even in the game, but I believe it's like that so you think Carol is the knight. But I think this outside source shows that Toby sees Noelle's mother as someone who cares about her kids, even if she isn't the best at showing it. And since Kris is helping her, maybe even feeling obligated to since they made a promise to her, it might indicate that Kris is either responsible or feels some sense of guilt, at the very least, for what happened to Des. And it feels like it's their job to rectify this. How Undyne and Torio play into this, though, is unclear, since we don't have any information on this supposed sacrifice. I do find it interesting how Kris, the knight, and Carol are working together, though. Since, like, for instance, Kris is directly interfering with the knight's ability to cause the roaring, as Kris is the only person capable of sealing dark fountains and sealing titans. Kris is the thing standing in their way of devastation. So it's interesting they work together in spite of this. In spite of this little thing, all things still point towards Kris and the knight working together. During the knight's battle, if you do no hit it, Kris coughs, and the knight tilts their head, like Kris is giving a goddamn signal to end the battle. It is also interesting that the knight can kill you in chapter 4, outright. Interesting to me that they are working together. But yeah, that's all for me, guys. Just wanted to raise a lot of these points, explain why this is the knight, explore Carol, Kris, and Asgore's involvement in the whole thing. We don't have a lot of information on the sacrifice, so it would be weird for me to make any sort of guess on that. But I'm very curious to see where that goes. And I just kind of wanted to make this video to kind of, I don't want to seem like arrogant or anything, but like kind of like celebrate the fact that I was right about multiple things. That's kind of like a big whole part of making this video. Just wanted to have a little bit of a discussion on where I think the story could be headed. Obviously, I don't have all the answers. But yeah, hope you guys enjoy. Subscribe if you like this video and agree with me. And yeah, take care.